Baking in hot conditions. It can be challenging to say the least, but there are some simple, practical steps that you can take to combat the problems. Now, managing the temperature enables us to slow the process down, reducing the chance of over-fermenting, developing better flavour profiles and making the process fit in with our schedules. So what is the perfect temperature? Well, straight off the bat, I can tell you that so far, my preferred temperature has been 25 degrees Celsius or 77 degrees Fahrenheit. So aiming for that, you won't go far wrong. And currently I am experimenting with slightly lower temperatures to see if I can get better flavour from my sourdough. So I guess the million-dollar question, why not just turn on the air conditioning? That is going to solve all of the problems with one simple click, right? Well, with soaring global energy costs, many people are trying to save money, so that may not be an option. Not to mention that some people don't have air conditioning, and I'm not that affected by hot temperatures, so I probably wouldn't burn my aircon just to keep my sourdough happy, however much I love it. So if using the air conditioning is going to solve your problems, then this video probably won't be that useful, but for everybody else, I hope you take away some helpful tips. Now, I would strongly suggest investing in at least one tool to monitor the temperature. I use several. I use a simple room thermometer for my kitchen temperature, a thermopen for taking dough temperatures, and then I use a blue dot for my chili bin or my cool bag. And then I've got my fermentation fridge and I use an Inkbird controller there and an Inkbird temperature logger. But you only need one good device. And in the description, you'll find a link to my website which lists my favourite devices. Now, when I plan my baking schedule, I want my starter to take between 8 to 10 hours to ferment. And if you normally feed your starter or levain at a ratio of 1 to 1 to 1, for example, 20 grams of starter, 20 grams of flour and 20 grams of water, and it's fermenting too quickly, try reducing the amount of starter that you use to inoculate it. I often use a ratio of 1 to 7 to 7. 4 grams of starter, 28 grams of flour and 28 grams of water. And I also use cold water from the fridge to mix it. And then the temperature of the starter is reduced considerably and it extends that fermentation time. Now you can ferment your starter or levain at room temperature and then just before it peaks, pop it into the fridge until you're ready to bake either later that day or the next. That's going to slam the brakes on the process, and that has an additional benefit because when you mix your dough, you can use that starter cold from the fridge, which will reduce your dough temperature. And then lastly, the best solution that I would advise everybody to try is to leave your starter in a cooler place to ferment. Now that could be a cooler room or it could be a space that you create to manage the temperature. And this could be a budget-friendly DIY solution. A cool bag with an ice brick works really well for this. Or if you need more space, you could use a chili bin with a couple of ice bricks. But if you do this, it's important to keep your container away or insulated from the ice brick. You can use a thermometer then to monitor the temperature. And of course, if budget isn't an issue, you could create your own fermentation fridge, which cools and heats for use all year round. And I'll link to a video on how to do that in the card above. So these temperature controlled spaces, they're not just good for the starter, but they are perfect for bulk fermenting the dough too. And it really doesn't need to be anything expensive or complicated. In most situations, reducing the temperature by 5 to 10 degrees Celsius is all that's needed, and most of these DIY solutions can handle this. For example, when it's 32 degrees Celsius, my chili bin will hold around 25 degrees Celsius for 8 hours or so, and it kind of starts to creep up. But every time I open the lid, it does take time to cool down again. So don't be opening the lid for no good reason. Now, whether you're using a temperature controlled space like this or not, reducing the dough temperature when you mix is really helpful. Now you can use your starter cold from the fridge and use cold water to do this, but if you want to be a bit more exact, you can calculate your desired dough temperature before mixing. So I've included a tool for this in my sourdough recipe calculator, and it makes it super easy. You can access that by clicking on the link in the video description, but alternatively you can definitely do this manually, and I'll put all of the sums that you'll need in the blog that will also be linked in the description. Now, funnily enough, I found that a 70% hydrated dough feels a lot softer at higher temperatures than it does at cooler temperatures. So if you're kind of struggling with sticky dough or it's a bit tricky to handle, then try reducing that hydration a little. 5% could make all of the difference. And using a good strong bread flour, the protein content of 12% or above will definitely help with the handling qualities. Now, during the bulk fermentation, we will need to remove the dough from its safe place, its kind of cooler environment, and bring it out into the higher temperatures to stretch the dough. So instead of laminating the dough, where a large amount of the dough will come into contact with that warmer work surface, opt for stretching inside the bowl. Stretch the dough in the bowl and work quickly and efficiently to minimize the time that the dough spends in the warmer air. Now, as we all know, the dough is going to ferment a lot quicker at these higher temperatures, and this can lead to over fermenting and your dough kind of breaking down, turning into a puddle and losing all of its strength. So if you normally let your dough double in volume during the bulk fermentation, in hot weather there's a chance that it could over ferment while you're shaping it and proving it. So why don't you try reducing that bulk fermentation a little? Instead of letting it double in size, let it increase by 3/4. This is going to give you a safe space. It's going to give you more time to shape the dough and let it prove without worrying that it over ferments. It's also going to make that dough easier to handle. And if you're proving your dough in the basket at room temperature and you're experiencing a few problems, then try reducing that ambient prove or placing the dough straight into the fridge after shaping. It can prove in the fridge overnight. Remember that your dough is continuing to ferment while the temperature of the dough drops in the fridge. Now, when baking in higher temperatures, I'd suggest leaving your dough for at least several hours in the fridge. It's going to increase the stability of the dough and reduce the chance of it kind of spreading when you turn it out of the basket before baking it. And then make sure that that dough goes from the fridge into the oven as quickly as possible. So I'm going to run you through the way that I would adjust my baking routine when the temperature is over 30 degrees Celsius without any expensive gear. So first I take my starter from the fridge and I'd mix up my levain. I'd use a ratio of 1 part starter to 7 parts flour and 7 parts cold water from the fridge. Now that would then ferment overnight for 8 to 10 hours in my chili bin with an ice brick. The next day I'd mix up my main dough to about 25 degrees Celsius. If you struggle to handle your dough, remember, keep that hydration level down. Then I place the dough into the chili bin to bulk ferment with a new ice brick from the freezer, and I do all of the stretching and folding that was necessary. Once the dough had increased by 75%, I'd shape it, place it into the basket, and then I'd prove it back in the chili bin for about an hour before placing it into the fridge overnight. The next day when it's time to bake, I take it from the fridge and get it into the oven as quickly as possible. And that really is all I need to do. But remember, this is going to be different for everyone, depending on the temperature, their starter, the flour that's been used, and the hydration, and of course, the recipe. So my advice is to experiment, and then experiment just a little bit more until you find the best combination of tactics that work for you, and make sure to have some fun while you're doing it. Now, your sense of smell and taste are two of the best tools for baking. So learn how to use them to monitor your starter by watching this video here. A huge thank you for watching. Let me know how you get on using these tips. I'll see you again very soon. Stay tuned.